My name is Jay Woodson, and I'm a 67-year-old retired construction worker from Portland. For over 40 years, I poured concrete framed houses and built the foundations that families call home. I did it all for my family, especially my son Michael. Then one day, I collapsed at the grocery store. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctor told me something that shattered my world. They had called my son when I was brought in unconscious, and his response was simply, "I'm busy with an important meeting right now. Can't someone else handle it?" In that moment, everything I thought I knew about family crumbled beneath me. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever felt abandoned by someone you sacrificed everything for, hit that like button and subscribe. This is a story about betrayal, healing, and finding dignity when you're left behind. I grew up in a blue-collar family in Michigan, where hard work wasn't just expected, it was the currency of respect. My father worked at the local factory, coming home with grease-stained hands and a tired smile. He taught me the value of honest labor and providing for family above all else. Those lessons became the foundation of my life. When I was 22, I met Sandra at a friend's barbecue. She had chestnut hair that caught the summer light and a laugh that made you feel like you were in on a wonderful secret. I was just starting my career in construction, and she was finishing nursing school. We were young, ambitious, and absolutely crazy about each other. "You build things with your hands, and I help heal people with mine," she said on our third date. "I think we make a good team, Jay Woodson." She was right. Within a year, we were married in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family. We rented a modest apartment, saved every penny we could, and dreamed about our future together. When Sandra told me she was pregnant 2 years later, I felt a joy so profound it nearly knocked me over. Michael was born on a rainy Tuesday in April. The first time I held him, his tiny fingers wrapped around my calloused thumb, I made a silent promise that this boy would have every opportunity I never had. I took on extra shifts, working 60 hours a week, sometimes determined to provide the best life possible for my family. When a construction company in Portland offered me a position with better pay and benefits, we packed up our life in Michigan and headed west. Sandra found work at a local hospital, and I threw myself into establishing my reputation as a reliable, skilled worker. Our family grew again 3 years later, when Amanda was born, a fierce little girl, with her mother's chestnut hair and my stubborn chin. The years that followed were a blur of early mornings and late nights. I coached Michael's Little League team on weekends, built a treehouse in our backyard that became the envy of the neighborhood kids, and never missed a single parent-teacher conference. Even when exhaustion settled into my bones like concrete, I showed up. That's what fathers do. Sandra and I saved enough to buy a modest 3-bedroom house in a good school district. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and it meant our kids could get the education we believed would open doors for them. Michael showed an early aptitude for mathematics, while Amanda gravitated toward art and literature. We encouraged both, spending money we barely had on tutors for Michael and art classes for Amanda. Then when Michael was 16 and Amanda was 13, Sandra started experiencing persistent headaches and fatigue. At first we blamed it on her night shifts at the hospital and the stress of raising teenagers. But when she collapsed one morning while getting ready for work, we couldn't ignore it anymore. The diagnosis was devastating: stage 3 brain cancer. The doctors gave her 2 years at most. I still remember Michael's face when we told the kids how his features hardened into a mask, while Amanda collapsed into tears. That night, I heard him in his room throwing books against the wall in rage. The next 2 years became a cruel juggling act. I took family leave when I could, but we needed my income for the mounting medical bills. Sandra's colleagues at the hospital were angels, covering shifts and organizing meal trains. I would work all day, rush to the hospital, then come home to make sure the kids were doing their homework and not completely falling apart. Through it all, Michael stepped up in ways that made my chest swell with pride. He took care of Amanda when I couldn't be there, maintained his straight-A average, and even got accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship. It seemed like he was channeling all his pain into determination. I thought that meant he was coping. The night before Sandra died, she made me promise two things. First, that I would make sure both kids finished college no matter what it took. Second, that I would even if it seemed impossible in that moment. "You've given everything to this family, Jay," she whispered, her voice thin as tissue paper. "Don't forget to save something for yourself." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The next morning, she was gone. The grief hit each of us differently. Amanda rebelled, staying out late, falling in with a crowd that worried me. Michael retreated into academics, barely speaking, except about college applications and SAT scores. I just kept working, taking on overtime whenever possible to cover Sandra's medical debts and save for both kids' education. It took almost a year, but Amanda eventually found her way back. One night she crawled into my bed like she used to, as a little girl, sobbing that she missed her mom. We stayed up until dawn looking through old photo albums and sharing memories. After that, something shifted. She started trying in school again, reconnected with her old friends, and even began helping me with dinner some nights. Michael, though, remained distant. When he left for Stanford, I drove him to the airport, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. Pride in his achievements, worry about him being so far from home, and a deep sadness that Sandra wasn't there to see it. "You call me if you need anything," I told him, as we stood at the security checkpoint. "Anything at all." He nodded, gave me a quick, awkward hug, and walked away without looking back. I stood there until I couldn't see him anymore, wondering if I had somehow failed him by not knowing how to help him grieve. For the next 4 years, I worked myself to exhaustion, sending money I couldn't really spare to help with Michael's expenses that the scholarship didn't cover. When Amanda decided on a state school to save money, I argued with her, insisting that she follow her dreams just like her brother. Eventually, we compromised on a well-respected art program at a university close enough that she could live at home for the first 2 years. It wasn't easy, but I kept my promise to Sandra. Both our children graduated college. I remortgaged the house, picked up weekend jobs doing home repairs, and ate more ramen noodles than I care to admit. But we did it. At Michael's graduation, I sat in the stands, imagining Sandra beside me, squeezing my hand and whispering, "We did good, Jay. We did good." After graduation, Michael accepted a job with a financial technology company in Boston. The starting salary made my eyebrows shoot up to my receding hairline. In 1 year, he would be making more than I did after decades of breaking my back on construction sites. I was so proud I could burst. "I'll call every Sunday," he promised as he packed up his apartment near Stanford. "And I'll fly home for Thanksgiving and Christmas." For the first few months, he kept that promise. Every Sunday evening, my phone would ring, and we'd talk about his new job, his apartment search, and the culture shock of moving from the West Coast to the East. But gradually, the calls became shorter. Sometimes he'd miss a Sunday, sending a text instead about being swamped with work. I understood. He was building his career just like I had at his age. The following spring, Michael mentioned he was seeing someone named Natalie. She worked in the marketing department of his company and came from a wealthy Boston family. He seemed happy, and that was all that mattered to me. When Thanksgiving rolled around, Michael called to say he couldn't make it home after all. Natalie had invited him to her family's house in the Hamptons, and it was a really important opportunity to meet people who could help his career. I swallowed my disappointment and told him I understood completely. "Maybe you can come visit me in Boston sometime," he suggested, though his tone lacked enthusiasm. "I'd like that," I said, knowing my budget wouldn't allow for such a trip anytime soon. Christmas was a similar story, though he did send expensive gifts for Amanda and me. The designer watch he got me probably cost more than a month of my mortgage payments. I wore it proudly, even though it felt out of place with my worn flannel shirts and work jeans. The following summer, I finally scraped together enough for a flight to Boston. Michael seemed uncomfortable when I suggested staying at his apartment, quickly recommending a hotel instead. He had a tiny one-bedroom place he explained barely enough room for himself. I understood, or at least I told myself I did. The weekend visit was strained in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. Michael showed me around the financial district where he worked, introduced me to Natalie over an awkward dinner at a restaurant where I couldn't pronounce half the menu items, and generally kept checking his phone like he was waiting for an emergency call. The most painful moment came during that dinner. I was telling Natalie about the time Michael built a model rocket for his 8th grade science fair, how he'd stayed up all night perfecting it. "Dad," Michael interrupted, his voice tight. "It's who, not that in that sentence. You said the teacher that gave me an A. It should be the teacher who gave me an A." The table fell silent. I felt my face grow hot as Natalie studied her wine glass with sudden interest. I nodded and corrected myself, the story's momentum lost. Later that night in my hotel room, I replayed the moment over and over, wondering when my son had become embarrassed by the way I spoke. Visits became rarer after that. Michael and Natalie got engaged the following year, and the wedding was a lavish affair at her parents' country club. I felt like a fish out of water in my rented tuxedo, surrounded by people who summered in Europe and wintered in the Caribbean, using these seasons as verbs in a language I didn't speak. At the rehearsal dinner, I overheard Michael talking to some of Natalie's friends. When someone asked what his father did for a living, he hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. "He's in finance," Michael said smoothly. "Property development." It wasn't exactly a lie. Construction is related to property development in a way. But it wasn't the truth either. I built things with my hands. I came home with dirt under my fingernails and concrete dust in my hair. I wasn't ashamed of it, but apparently my son was. After the wedding, the calls became even less frequent. When Michael and Natalie bought a house in an exclusive Boston suburb, I only learned about it through Facebook. When they announced they were expecting their first child, it was Amanda who called to tell me, having heard it from Michael first. I tried to bridge the growing distance. I sent thoughtful gifts, left voicemails expressing how much I missed him, and suggested video calls so I could at least see his face. Most went unanswered, and when they were, the responses were brief and distracted. When my grandson Thomas was born, I flew to Boston immediately, despite the financial strain. The hospital visit was brief, with Natalie's parents dominating the room. Michael introduced me as my dad, without using my name, and I noticed how he subtly directed me away when the hospital photographer came in for family photos. I stayed at a nearby hotel for 3 days, hoping to spend time with my new grandson. In those 3 days, I was welcomed to their home exactly once for a tightly scheduled 2-hour visit, where Natalie's mother held the baby most of the time. When my 65th birthday came around, Amanda threw a small party at her apartment. She had invited Michael, of course, but 2 days before, he called to say there was an emergency at work that required his attention. I pretended it didn't matter, but Amanda was furious. "He's full of it, Dad," she fumed while setting up decorations. "It's your 65th birthday. Nothing is that important. His career is demanding." I defended him, though the words felt hollow even to me. And Boston is a long way to travel for just a weekend. Amanda fixed me with a look so reminiscent of her mother that it made my heart catch. Stop making excuses for him. He's being a jerk, and you know it. Perhaps I did know it, but admitting it would mean facing a truth too painful to acknowledge my son, whom I had sacrificed everything for, didn't want me in his life. Our last phone conversation before everything changed happened on a Tuesday evening. I had called to tell him about some minor surgery I needed for a rotator cuff injury, a battle scar from decades of construction work. "That's tough, Dad," he said, sounding distracted. I could hear typing in the background. "Listen, can I call you back? I'm swamped with this report that's due tomorrow." "Sure," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "Maybe this weekend." "Yeah, maybe. I'll text you." He hung up before I could even say goodbye. He never called back that weekend, or the next. And I was too proud, too afraid of being a burden to call him again. After 44 years of construction work, I finally retired at 66. My body had been telling me it was time for years, with aching joints in the morning and a back that seized up if I lifted anything heavier than a gallon of milk. I had modest savings, a paid-off house, and a small pension. It wasn't the retirement some dream of with cruises and winter homes in Florida, but it was enough for me. I had imagined retirement would mean more time with family, especially my grandson, who I barely knew. Maybe Michael would bring Thomas to visit now that I had a flexible schedule. Maybe I could even fly to Boston more often, stay at a nearby hotel, and be a proper grandfather. Those hopes were still fresh when I started noticing the symptoms. Shortness of breath while climbing the stairs, a persistent pain in my left arm, fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to cure. I ignored them, chalking it up to age and the accumulated wear and tear of a physical career. On a Thursday afternoon in October, I was at Wilson's Grocery picking up ingredients for a lasagna recipe Amanda had sent me. I remember reaching for a can of tomato paste on the top shelf when a crushing pressure descended on my chest. It felt like someone had parked a truck on my sternum. My left arm went numb, and black spots danced at the edges of my vision. Sir, are you all right?" A concerned voice seemed to come from very far away. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store ceiling swirled above me as I collapsed to the linoleum floor. The last thing I remember is a young store employee kneeling beside me, phone in hand, calling for an ambulance. I woke up disoriented, the antiseptic smell of hospital surrounding me before I even opened my eyes. Monitors beeped steadily nearby. An IV line snaked from my arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging above the bed. My chest felt like it had been cracked open and poorly glued back together. A doctor stood at the foot of my bed, reviewing a chart. She was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. When she noticed I was awake, she approached with a reassuring smile. "Mr. Woodson, I'm Dr. Lauren Thompson. You're at Providence Portland Medical Center. Do you know why you're here?" My throat felt like sandpaper. "Heart attack," I managed to croak. She nodded, pouring a small cup of water and helping me take a sip. "A significant one. You're lucky someone called 911 so quickly. We had to perform an emergency procedure to clear a blocked artery, but you're stable now." I glanced around the empty room, suddenly aware that no familiar faces surrounded my bed. "My daughter, we've contacted your emergency contacts," Dr. Thompson said, checking something on her tablet. "Your daughter Amanda is on a flight from Chicago. She should be here by evening." I nodded, relieved that Amanda was coming, but confused by another absence. "My son Michael." Something flickered across Dr. Thompson's face. Discomfort, perhaps, or hesitation. She focused on adjusting my IV line, not meeting my eyes. "We called your son first as he was listed as your primary emergency contact. He was unavailable to come at the moment." The careful wording set off alarm bells in my mind. "What exactly did he say?" Dr. Thompson sighed, finally meeting my gaze. Mr. Woodson, I don't think— Please, I interrupted. I need to know. She placed a gentle hand on my arm. He said, and I'm quoting, "I'm in an important meeting. Can't you handle it? I'm really busy right now." Then he asked if we could call your daughter instead. The words hit me like a physical blow. All those years of working overtime, the college tuition I'd scraped together, the birthdays missed because I was working double shifts to give him opportunities, the knees I'd ruined kneeling on concrete so he could walk through the doors of Stanford. And when I was lying unconscious, possibly dying, I was an inconvenience to be handled by someone else. I turned my face toward the window, not wanting the doctor to see the tears that filled my eyes. Outside, rain streaked down the glass, mirroring the tracks on my cheeks. I understand this is difficult, Dr. Thompson said softly, but try not to get upset. It's not good for your heart right now. I nodded mutely, unable to trust my voice. She checked my vitals once more before leaving me alone with the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the devastating knowledge that my son couldn't be bothered to come when I might have been dying. A nurse named Patricia came in shortly after, a woman about my age with silver-streaked hair and efficient, gentle hands. She adjusted my pillows, helped me take my medication, and chatted about inconsequential things, clearly trying to lift my spirits. When her shift ended, she hesitated by the door. My replacement will be excellent, but I wanted to check if you needed anything else before I go. What I needed was for the last 40 years to not have been in vain. What I needed was a son who cared whether I lived or died. What I needed was Sandra beside me holding my hand and telling me everything would be okay. I'm fine, I lied. Thank you. Patricia gave me a look that said she knew better but wouldn't press the issue. I'll be back tomorrow morning. Try to rest. After she left in the quiet darkness of the hospital room, I finally let myself break down completely. Deep, wrenching sobs tore from my chest, pulling painfully at my fresh incisions. I cried for Sandra, for the family we'd dreamed of, for the son who had rejected not just my background, but me entirely, and for the bitter realization that a lifetime of sacrifice had earned me nothing but an empty hospital room. Amanda arrived like a whirlwind just after 8 p.m., her eyes red from crying, her travel bag still in hand. She threw her arms around me carefully, mindful of the tubes and wires. Dad. Oh my God, Dad. I was so scared. Are you okay? What did the doctors say? I came as soon as I heard. The contrast between my children's reactions couldn't have been more stark. Amanda had dropped everything to be at my side. Michael couldn't even be bothered to pick up the phone for a second call. I'm okay, sweetheart. I assured her, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. My heart was damaged in more ways than one. As I drifted in and out of sleep that night, the hospital machines beeping softly in the background, I was haunted by nightmares of Sandra's death, of Michael's rejection, of a lifetime of work, amounting to nothing but this sterile room and the crushing weight of abandonment. Each time I woke gasping and disoriented, Amanda was there, squeezing my hand and reminding me that I wasn't completely alone. But the question that kept circling in my mind, like a vulture, was simple and devastating. What had it all been for? The weeks after my heart attack were the darkest of my life, darker even than when Sandra died. At least then I had a purpose, taking care of our children, fulfilling my promise to her. Now I felt utterly adrift, my identity as a provider and father revealed as a cruel illusion. The doctors discharged me after a week with strict instructions about medication, diet, and physical activity. Amanda wanted me to come stay with her and her husband in Chicago while I recovered. We have a spare room, Dad. It makes no sense for you to be alone right now. but I stubbornly insisted on returning to my own house. I couldn't bear the thought of being dependent, of being a burden to yet another person who might eventually resent me for it. So Amanda took a 2-week leave from her job as a graphic designer and stayed with me instead, sleeping in her old bedroom that had remained largely unchanged since her college days. She cooked heart-healthy meals, drove me to follow-up appointments, and managed my medications with the organizational skills she'd inherited from her mother. All the while, Michael's absence loomed like a ghost between us, unmentioned, but impossible to ignore. It was 16 days after my heart attack when Michael finally called. I was sitting in my recliner, staring blankly at a baseball game I wasn't really watching, when his name flashed on my phone screen. My hand trembled slightly as I answered. "Dad, hey," he said, his voice artificially bright. "How are you feeling?" No apology, no acknowledgement of his absence. Just a casual greeting, as if he'd called on any normal day. "I'm recovering," I said, my voice cooler than I'd intended. Good. That's great." An awkward pause followed. "Look, I'm sorry I haven't called sooner. Things have been absolutely crazy at work. We're in the middle of a major acquisition, and I've barely had time to breathe." Another excuse. Another "I'm too busy," wrapped in different packaging. The anger I'd been suppressing bubbled up like lava. "Too busy to call your father after he almost died." The words hung in the air between us. Michael cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Dad, come on. The doctors said you were stable. I knew you were in good hands, and Amanda was there. It's not like you were alone." "The doctors called you first, Michael. Do you know what you said to them?" Another pause. "I was in an important meeting. I'm sure I wasn't at my best. You said, and I'm quoting here, 'I'm in an important meeting. Can't you handle it? I'm really busy right now.'" "Dad, you're being dramatic." I was caught off guard. And like I said, I knew Amanda would be there. And the casual dismissal of my feelings, the complete lack of understanding of how deeply his words had wounded me, was the final straw. Do you have any idea how it felt to wake up in that hospital and learn that my own son couldn't be bothered to come, or even call? 2 weeks, Michael. 2 weeks of silence while I wondered if everything I ever did for you meant nothing. "That's not fair," he protested. "You know how much pressure I'm under. Natalie's father got me this position, and I can't afford to show any weakness. The financial world doesn't stop for personal problems." Personal problems. That's what I was to him now. A personal problem to be managed. "I worked 60-hour weeks for 20 years so you could go to college," I said quietly. "I missed your Little League games because I was working overtime to pay for your math tutor. I ate ramen noodles for dinner so you could have steak. And when I had a heart attack, you were too busy to pick up the phone. Dad, I think your condition is making you emotional. We can talk about this when you're feeling better. I was thinking, actually, there's a really nice retirement community near us in Boston. Maybe it's time to consider something like that so we don't have to worry about you being alone out there." We don't have to worry. As if I was a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed from a distance. The subtext was clear: sell my home, move across the country, and be tucked away somewhere out of sight where I wouldn't interfere with his carefully constructed life. "I have to go," I said abruptly, unable to continue the conversation without saying things I might regret. "Goodbye, Michael." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with anger and grief. I sat there in my silent living room, the baseball game still playing unwatched, and felt something inside me finally break. That evening, my neighbor Frank found me sitting in the dark. He had come over with the casserole his wife had made using his spare key when I didn't answer the door. Frank and I had never been particularly close, just friendly in the way of longtime neighbors, but the sight of me sitting alone in the dark apparently alarmed him enough to take action. "Jay," he said, flipping on a lamp. "What's going on, buddy? You okay?" I looked up at him, this man I'd exchanged nothing more than weather comments and borrowed lawn tools with for 15 years, and found myself telling him everything. About Sandra, about the sacrifices, about Michael's rejection, and Amanda's unwavering support. About feeling like my entire life had been built around a family that no longer existed in the way I'd imagined. Frank listened without interruption, settling into the armchair across from me. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "My old man was like you," he finally said. "Worked himself to death for us kids. Literally had a stroke at 62 and was gone. You know what I learned from that? Life's too damn short to give everything to people who give nothing back." "He's my son," I said weakly. "And you're his father. Respect goes both ways, Jay. You deserve better than this." Later that night, alone again, Frank's words echoed in my head. "You deserve better than this." Had I spent so long defining myself by what I provided that I'd forgotten my own worth? The next morning, I woke up struggling to breathe, my chest tight with anxiety rather than cardiac issues. Amanda found me gasping on the edge of my bed, helped me through the panic attack, and then made an executive decision. "You're seeing a therapist. This isn't just physical recovery we're talking about." She was right, of course. The heart attack had broken more than just my cardiovascular system. It had shattered the illusions I'd built my life around, and I needed help putting the pieces back together in a new configuration. Dr. Marcus specialized in family trauma and worked with many older adults. In our first session, I was guarded, uncomfortable with the idea of spilling my problems to a stranger. But something about his direct, no-nonsense approach broke through my resistance. "It sounds to me," he said, after listening to my story, "like you've spent your entire adult life being a provider, and now you don't know who you are without that role." His words hit with the force of truth. Who was I, if not the man who sacrificed everything for his family? What was my purpose now? Over the next few months, weekly sessions with Dr. Marcus helped me unpack decades of self-neglect, disguised as familial duty. I began to see how I had enabled Michael's behavior by never setting boundaries, by always prioritizing his needs above my own, to an unhealthy degree. "You deserve happiness too, Jay," Dr. Marcus reminded me in every session. "What would make you happy independent of your children?" It was such a simple question, and yet I struggled to answer it. What did I want just for me? The question was so foreign, it felt almost selfish to consider. One evening, cleaning out a closet as part of what Dr. Marcus called reclaiming my space, I found an old shoebox filled with mementos. Among them was a yellowed piece of paper titled "Bucket List" in Sandra's neat handwriting. We had written it together the year before we got married, full of dreams and plans for someday. Learn to sail. Visit Spain, where my grandmother was born. Build a piece of furniture from scratch. See the northern lights. Learn to play an instrument. I ran my fingers over Sandra's handwriting, remembering how we'd laughed as we compiled the list, so certain we had all the time in the world. In the end, we hadn't done a single thing on it. There had always been more pressing needs: mortgage payments, braces, college funds. Staring at that list in my hands, I made a decision. It wasn't too late to honor those dreams. It wasn't too late to find out who Jay Woodson was, beyond being Michael and Amanda's father. The day I joined the Senior New Beginnings support group at the community center marked the first step in my transformation. It was Amanda's suggestion, a gentle nudge toward connecting with others who might understand what I was going through. "Just try it once, Dad," she urged. "If you hate it, you never have to go back." The group consisted of about 15 people, all over 60, all dealing with some form of family estrangement or major life transition. Some had children who rarely visited. Others were adjusting to retirement or widowhood. One woman, Elaine, had recently been asked to move out of her family home by her son and daughter-in-law, who wanted to modernize it. 43 years I lived in that house, she told the group, her voice tight with controlled anger. Raised 3 children there, but apparently my outdated taste was bringing down their property values. For the first time since my heart attack, I didn't feel alone in my pain. These people understood the particular sting of being set aside by the very family you had centered your life around. They didn't judge my feelings or tell me I was being dramatic. They nodded in recognition, offered tissues when needed, and shared their own stories of rebuilding their sense of self. Through the group, I met Harold, a retired electrician who had taken up woodworking after his divorce. He invited me to visit his workshop, a converted garage much like mine. Watching him transform raw lumber into a delicate jewelry box awakened something in me, a memory of enjoying working with my hands before it became just a means to an end. You should try it, Harold suggested, handing me a piece of sandpaper. It's good for the soul to create something beautiful. I signed up for a beginner's woodworking class at the community college the next day. The instructor, a woman named Diane with calloused hands and infinite patience, guided me through basic techniques. My first project, a simple picture frame, was objectively terrible, the corners uneven and the finish blotchy. But I felt a satisfaction in creating it that I hadn't experienced in years. Around this same time, Patricia, the nurse who had cared for me in the hospital, called to check on my recovery. Our conversation flowed easily, and before I knew it, I had invited her for coffee. She accepted with a warmth that made my heart race in a way unrelated to my cardiac condition. Our coffee meetup turned into lunch, which evolved into regular walks in the park as my strength returned. Patricia was a widow too, her husband lost to cancer 5 years earlier. She understood grief without being consumed by it, and her practical, positive outlook was like a breath of fresh air. You remind me of Sandra sometimes, I told her one afternoon as we sat on a park bench watching ducks glide across the pond. She had that same way of seeing the good in things without ignoring the bad. Patricia smiled, her hand finding mine on the bench between us. I'll take that as the highest compliment. As spring turned to summer, my garage gradually transformed into a modest workshop. I started with small projects, learning from mistakes and YouTube tutorials. A cutting board, a set of coasters, a simple side table. Each piece better than the last, each completion giving me a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with providing for others and everything to do with personal growth. Amanda visited whenever she could, marveling at my newfound hobby and the subtle changes in my demeanor. You seem lighter, Dad, she observed. Happier. I was. For the first time in decades, I was pursuing something solely because it brought me joy. I was connecting with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. I was building a life that felt authentically mine. One Saturday morning, Harold convinced me to join him at a local craft fair where he sold his woodwork. Just bring a few pieces, he suggested. See what happens. To my astonishment, every item I brought sold within the first 3 hours. A young couple particularly loved my walnut serving tray, asking if I could make a matching set for their upcoming housewarming party. I handed them my newly printed business card, Woodson Custom Woodcraft, with a surge of pride I hadn't felt since my construction days. What began as therapy evolved into a small business. Word spread through Harold's network and the craft fair community. Soon I was receiving regular custom orders, enough to keep me busy but not overwhelmed. I converted the spare bedroom into an office where I could sketch designs and communicate with clients. My retirement savings remained untouched as the business began to pay for itself and then some. Patricia supported my venture wholeheartedly, sometimes sitting in the workshop with a book while I worked comfortable in shared silence. Our relationship deepened, gradually built on mutual respect and the wisdom that comes from having loved and lost before. Through all of this, Michael remained distant. He called occasionally brief conversations that skimmed the surface of our lives. I told him about my woodworking, and he responded with polite interest that never led to follow-up questions. I asked about Thomas, now a toddler I barely knew, and received generic updates about milestones and preschool applications. Then one evening, after a particularly successful day where I'd finished a commission for a local restaurant, my phone rang with Michael's number. "Dad." His voice sounded different, tighter somehow. "Are you busy right now?" The irony of the question wasn't lost on me. "I'm just finishing up in the workshop. What's going on?" A long pause. "Natalie and I are having some problems. I thought I don't know, maybe I could come visit for a weekend. Clear my head." It had been over a year since my heart attack, 14 months since he'd deemed me not worth the interruption of an important meeting. Now he needed something, and suddenly a visit was possible. The old me would have jumped at this opportunity, eager to welcome my son back, no matter the circumstances. But Dr. Marcus's voice echoed in my head. "Healthy relationships have boundaries, Jay. Love without respect isn't sustainable." "You're welcome to visit," I said carefully. "But I'd like to understand what's happening first." Another pause. "It's complicated. Work stress, Natalie's expectations, her parents constantly interfering. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe." I knew that feeling all too well, but I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Anyway, I thought maybe some time away would help. Give me perspective." I agreed to the visit, setting the dates for 2 weekends later. After hanging up, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the pieces of a rocking chair I was building for Patricia's birthday, wondering if Michael's sudden desire to reconnect was genuine or merely convenient. Michael arrived on a Friday afternoon, driving a rental car from the airport. I watched from the porch as he pulled into the driveway, noting the designer sunglasses, the expensive watch, the carefully casual clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage had been. He looked like a stranger, someone I might pass on the street without recognition. His eyes widened slightly as he approached the house. "You've made some changes." It was true. With Patricia's encouragement and Amanda's enthusiastic help, I had finally updated the house that had remained largely unchanged since Sandra's death. Fresh paint in warmer colors. New furniture that I had mostly built myself. A garden in the backyard where Sandra's neglected flower beds had once been. "Come in," I said, holding the door open. "I'll show you around." Michael followed me through the house with the cautious air of someone in a museum afraid to touch anything. He commented politely on the changes, his gaze lingering on the wall of photos that now included recent pictures of me with Patricia, with my woodworking friends at Amanda's wedding last spring. "You've been busy," he observed, and I couldn't tell if it was approval or accusation in his voice. I showed him to the guest room, formerly his bedroom, but now transformed with a handcrafted bed frame and nightstands I had made myself. Only a small shelf of his childhood trophies remained as a nod to the room's previous occupant. "Dinner's at 6, I told him. "Patricia is coming over. I thought you should meet her." "Patricia?" He looked confused. "My girlfriend. I mentioned her in our calls." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Right, the nurse. I didn't realize it was that serious." I chose not to correct his misconception about the nature of my relationship with Patricia. Let him wonder. Let him realize how little he actually knew about my life now. Dinner was pleasant, but strained. Patricia, bless her, carried much of the conversation, asking Michael thoughtful questions about his work and life in Boston. He answered politely, but revealed little of substance. It wasn't until Patricia excused herself around 9, kissing me goodbye at the door, with a whispered, "Call me later," that Michael's real purpose began to emerge. "She seems nice," he said, as we settled in the living room with cups of coffee. "You seem different." "I am different," I acknowledged. "A heart attack has a way of clarifying what matters." Michael nodded, staring into his cup. "That's sort of why I wanted to talk to you. About what matters." He set his coffee down and leaned forward, elbows on knees, in a posture I recognized from his childhood when he was working up to a difficult confession. "Natalie and I are having problems. Serious ones. We're in counseling, but I'm not sure it's helping. She thinks I work too much. I think she spends too much. Her parents are always involved in every decision. It's suffocating." I listened without interrupting, noting how he presented the issues as external to himself, problems happening to him rather than problems he participated in creating. "Anyway," he continued, "things came to a head last month when I got passed over for a promotion I was counting on. Without that salary increase, we can't really afford the lifestyle we've built. The mortgage on the house, Thomas's preschool, the country club membership, her parents insist is necessary for networking." He trailed off, then took a deep breath. "I hate to even ask this, but I'm in a bind. Just temporarily. I was wondering if you might consider helping us out. Just until I secure the next promotion, which should be within 6 months. And there it was. Not a reconciliation, not a genuine desire to repair our relationship. A financial request. I was still just a provider to him, a resource to be tapped when convenient. "How much are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He named a figure that made my eyebrows rise. It was more than I had in my checking account, though I could access it from my retirement savings. The amount wasn't the issue, though. It was what it represented. "That's a significant amount, Michael." I know. But like I said, it's temporary. 6 months, 8 tops. I'll pay you back with interest." I studied my son's face, this man I had raised who now sat before me as essentially a stranger. Why come to me? Why not Natalie's parents? They seem to be in a better financial position. Michael's expression darkened. "They already think I'm not good enough for their daughter. I can't go to them for money. It would confirm everything they believe about me." "And what do they believe about you?" He looked away. "That I'm not from the right background. That I'm climbing above my station. They never say it directly, but it's always there." A flash of protective anger surged through me. Whatever issues existed between Michael and me, the thought of anyone looking down on my son for his background infuriated me. But then I remembered how he had described me to Natalie's friends. He's in finance, property development. How he had corrected my grammar at dinner. How he had systematically erased his working-class roots to fit into a world that would never truly accept him. "I'm sorry they make you feel that way," I said sincerely. "No one should be judged by where they come from." He looked relieved, clearly interpreting my words as a prelude to agreement. "So you'll help I can set up a transfer as soon as tomorrow." I took a deep breath. "No, Michael. I won't be sending you money." His face froze in shock. "What? I've spent my entire life trying to give you everything. Working myself to exhaustion to provide opportunities. And somewhere along the way, I became nothing more than a resource to you. A backstop. An ATM. "That's not fair," he protested. "This is the first time I've ever asked you for money. But it's not the first time you've treated me as less important than your career or your image or whatever meeting you were in when I was unconscious in a hospital bed." His face flushed. Are you seriously still hung up on that? I told you I was caught off guard. And everything turned out fine. No, everything did not turn out fine. My voice remained calm but firm. My son couldn't be bothered to call for 2 weeks when I nearly died. My son is embarrassed by me by the work I did to put him through college. My son tells people I'm in finance because he can't bear to admit his father worked with his hands. Dad, you're being dramatic again. I've never been embarrassed by you. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf, retrieving a folder I had prepared months ago, but never thought I would actually use. I handed it to Michael. "What's this?" he asked, opening it cautiously. "My hospital bill. Notice the date and timestamp of admission. Now look at my phone records from that day, which I've included. See the incoming call from the hospital to your number, and your call that went to voicemail immediately after. The same voicemail where you said, and I quote, 'I'm in an important meeting. Can't you handle it?'" Michael stared at the papers, his face draining of color. "You kept all this? Why would you do that?" "Because for months I thought I was losing my mind. That maybe I had misunderstood, or the doctors had misquoted you. That surely my own son wouldn't dismiss me so completely. But there it is, in black and white." He closed the folder, setting it aside with shaking hands. "I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. I want you to understand something. I love you, Michael. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But love doesn't mean I have to accept disrespect. It doesn't mean I have to be your financial safety net while you pretend I don't exist the rest of the time." "That's not what I'm doing," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? When was the last time you called just to talk? Not because you needed something, not out of obligation, but because you genuinely wanted to connect with me." His silence was answer enough. "I've built a new life for myself," I continued gently, "with people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. If you want to be part of that life, you're welcome to, but on different terms than before." "What terms?" he asked, an edge of defensiveness in his voice. "Mutual respect, genuine interest in each other's lives, regular communication that isn't one-sided, and an acknowledgement of the past without dwelling on it." Michael stood up abruptly. "So that's it, help me or get out, some father you are." The words were designed to wound, to provoke, to make me back down. The old Jay would have capitulated immediately, desperate to maintain any connection with his son. But I wasn't that man anymore. "I'm sorry you see it that way," I said calmly. "The guest room is yours for the weekend as planned. I hope you'll think about what I've said." Michael grabbed his jacket from the back of the couch. "I don't need to think about it. And I don't need to stay where I'm not welcome. I'll get a hotel." "You are welcome, Michael. Just not on the terms you're used to." But he was already heading for the door, pulling out his phone to presumably book a room. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, not looking back. "This isn't how family is supposed to work," he said, his voice tight with anger. "No," I agreed softly. "It's not." The door closed behind him with a decisive click. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my new life, feeling a complex mixture of grief and liberation. I had finally stood up for myself, set a boundary that was decades overdue. It hurt God how it hurt, but beneath the pain was a steady current of peace. I had done the right thing for both of us. Later that night, I called Amanda to tell her what had happened. Her response was immediate and supportive. "I'm proud of you, Dad. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." "I feel terrible," I admitted, "like I've failed as a father." "You didn't fail," she assured me. "You just finally stopped letting him fail as a son without consequences." As I lay in bed that night, I realized she was right. True love sometimes means holding people accountable even when it's painful, especially when it's painful. I had finally broken the cycle of giving everything and receiving nothing in return. Whether Michael would recognize that as an act of love or merely a rejection remained to be seen. 6 months passed without a word from Michael. No calls on holidays, no response to my occasional text messages checking in. I monitored the charges on my credit card, half expecting to find he had somehow accessed my accounts, but nothing appeared. Whatever financial solution he had found, it hadn't come from me. During those months, my small woodworking business continued to flourish. What had begun as therapy became a genuine second career. A local home design magazine did a feature on Portland's craftsman renaissance, including a full-page spread on my custom furniture. Orders increased to the point where I had to create a waiting list and hire a part-time assistant, a community college student named Ryan, who reminded me of myself at that age, eager to learn and work with his hands. Patricia and I grew closer, our relationship deepening into true partnership. We didn't discuss marriage, both feeling we had already had our great loves, but we spent most nights together and began tentatively discussing the possibility of selling both our houses and finding a place that would be truly ours. Amanda announced she was pregnant with her first child, news that filled me with a bittersweet joy. I would be more present for this grandchild than I had been allowed to be for Thomas, a thought that both comforted and saddened me. "You'll be the best grandpa," Amanda assured me during one of our weekly video calls. "This baby is going to be so loved." I was in the middle of crafting a cradle for my future grandchild when an unexpected email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "Photos of Thomas." I opened it cautiously, wondering if it was spam. It wasn't. The email was from Natalie, Michael's wife, containing several recent pictures of my grandson, now a sturdy 3-year-old, with Michael's dark hair and Sandra's thoughtful eyes. He was building a sandcastle at the beach, riding a tricycle, blowing out candles on a birthday cake I hadn't been invited to. The brief message accompanying the photos was formal, but not unkind. "Jay, I thought you might like to see some recent pictures of Thomas. He's growing so fast. Michael and I are working through some issues with a counselor. It's been helpful. Perhaps when things are more stable, we can discuss a visit. Hope you're well. Natalie." I sat staring at my computer screen, tears blurring the images of the grandson I barely knew. It wasn't much, this small olive branch, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall of silence Michael had built. I responded with genuine gratitude, keeping my message simple and positive. I attached a picture of the cradle I was making for Amanda's baby, mentioning that I would be happy to make something for Thomas as well if they would like. I didn't push for more, didn't mention the conflict with Michael, or make demands. Just an acknowledgement of the gesture and a small offering in return. 3 weeks later, another email arrived, this time with a video of Thomas playing in a park, calling "Watch Me Daddy" as he climbed a jungle gym. My heart contracted at the sound of his voice, this little person with my blood who didn't know me at all. Then, on a Tuesday morning in early October, exactly 1 year after my heart attack, my phone rang with Michael's number. I answered with cautious hope. "Dad." His voice sounded different, subdued. "Are you free for lunch tomorrow? I'll be in Portland for a business meeting." We agreed to meet at a casual restaurant near my workshop. I arrived early, choosing a quiet corner table where we could talk without interruption. When Michael walked in, I was struck by how tired he looked, the designer clothes and expensive watch at odds with the dark circles under his eyes and the new lines around his mouth. He sat down across from me, placing his phone face down on the table, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "You look good, Dad," he said after we'd ordered. The woodworking business must agree with you. It does, I confirmed. How are you, Michael, really? He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it made my chest ache with nostalgia. I've been better. Natalie and I separated for a while after I left here. We're back together now, trying to make it work for Thomas's sake. The counseling helps. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. I lost that promotion, he admitted, and then got put on probation for performance issues. Apparently 60-hour weeks weren't enough. They wanted 70-80. I'm sorry to hear that. That can't have been easy. He gave a hollow laugh. The irony is getting passed over was probably the best thing that could have happened. It forced me to reevaluate everything. What I was working for. Who I was becoming. I took a sip of water, still waiting, sensing he had more to say. Our counselor asked me to think about patterns in my relationships. He continued, staring at the table, where I learned to define my worth by achievement, by appearances. Why I'm so terrified of being seen as less than. It led back to some uncomfortable realizations. He finally met my eyes. About how I've treated you. About how ashamed I've been of where I came from, of your work, even though that work put me through college. About how I've spent years trying to erase parts of myself to fit in with Natalie's world. The words I had waited so long to hear, delivered not in a dramatic apology, but in a quiet acknowledgement of truth. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. I'm not saying this right. Michael continued, frustration edging his voice. I practiced this speech a dozen times, but now. You don't need a speech, Michael. Just talk to me. Like you used to. He nodded, took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Dad. For how I behaved when you were in the hospital. For the years of distance before that. For being embarrassed by you instead of proud. Most of all, for coming here 6 months ago asking for money instead of reconnection. Thank you for saying that, I said simply. It means a lot. I don't expect things to magically fix themselves, he added quickly. I know I've done damage that can't be undone with one conversation, but I'm hoping we can start rebuilding, slowly, on different terms, like you said. I reached across the table and squeezed his arm, a gesture of affection I hadn't offered in years. I'd like that. Our lunch stretched to nearly 2 hours, the conversation gradually shifting from awkward to cautiously comfortable. Michael told me about Thomas's preschool adventures, about the career changes he was considering that might allow more work-life balance, about his newfound interest in running that gave him time to think. I shared stories about my woodworking projects, about Patricia, about Amanda's pregnancy, and my excitement about the new grandchild. We didn't solve everything. Old hurts were acknowledged, but not dwelled upon. New boundaries were tentatively established. By the time we parted with a somewhat stiff hug, something had shifted between us. Not healed completely, but no longer actively bleeding. 2 months later, Michael, Natalie, and Thomas came for Thanksgiving, joining Amanda and her husband at my house. Patricia cooked most of the meal, with all of us pitching in. The atmosphere was occasionally tense, particularly between Amanda and Michael, but moments of genuine connection broke through like sunshine between clouds. Thomas took to me immediately, fascinated by my workshop and the small wooden toy car I had made for him. Again, Grandpa, he demanded, when I showed him how the wheels turned the simple word, Grandpa, healing something deep inside me. That evening, after the others had gone to bed, Amanda found me sitting on the back porch, watching the stars. You okay, Dad? She asked, settling beside me with a cup of tea. Better than okay, I assured her. just thinking about how much has changed in a year. She nodded, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. Are you and Michael really okay? Or are you just pretending for the holidays? We're working on it, I said truthfully. It's not perfect. It might never be. But it's better than silence. I'm still angry at him sometimes, she admitted, for how he treated you, for not being there when you needed him. I understand that. But I've learned something important this year, Amanda. Holding on to anger doesn't punish the other person. It just keeps you trapped. Mom would be proud of you, she said softly, of how you've rebuilt your life, of the boundaries you've set. She always said you gave too much. She was right as usual. I smiled at the memory of Sandra's gentle chiding about my inability to say no. But I'm learning. Better late than never. The journey of the past year had taught me more than I could have imagined about myself, about relationships, about the difference between sacrifice and self-erasure. I had learned that it's never too late to rediscover who you are, that setting boundaries isn't selfish, but necessary for genuine connection, that sometimes the greatest act of love is holding people accountable for how they treat you. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to what I could provide or sacrifice. It existed independently in who I was as a person, in the joy I found in creating beautiful things with my hands, in the authentic connections I had built with people who valued me for myself. My relationship with Michael might never be what I had once hoped for, but it had the potential to become something new, something based on mutual respect rather than obligation. And that I realized as I sat beneath the stars with my daughter beside me was enough. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you love, or struggled to rebuild a relationship after betrayal? Share your experiences in the comments below. I read everyone, and your stories help others feel less alone in their journey. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your self-worth. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, dignity isn't about never falling. It's about how you choose to rise again.